Hello. I'm gonna do some more tarot. I'm really new to live streaming, but we're just gonna give it a try. My name is Jared DeGrippo. I have been reading tarot for 20 or 30 years since I was 13. And I am gonna go over a couple of cards, talk about a few things that you can look at if you're working with tarot cards. And the first thing I wanted to start with is talking about your deck of cards. So I have two decks that were designed by Pamela Coleman Smith and directed by Arthur Edward Waite, who is a very famous occultist, a famous English occultist from the early 1900s. He's a very interesting guy. If you haven't read about Aleister Crowley or Arthur Edward Waite or Israel Regardie or any of those chaps, they're pretty interesting if you want to check them out. So I have boxes of two decks here in front of me. This one is giant. It is very large. It's huge. It is a giant deck. I like to use that for streaming because you can see it really well. When you get a deck of tarot cards, it'll come like this in a little box. You can open it up and it will come with a book. No matter what size tarot cards you get, it will have a book that is appropriately sized in the box. This one has a bigger one. These really small ones are the ones that I carry with me and that I read with a lot. And so I've said before on the stream that we are not dealers in Vegas, so we don't do fancy flipping and shuffling and all of that. We need to be a little more thoughtful about it. And one of the reasons I like that is because I really like a little bit of the symbolism of the cards to sort of hit your subconscious as you're shuffling them. So even shuffling them a few times with them facing up like this can help sort of get an idea of what's on them. And I think that embedding that in your subconscious is really good and really important. If you read any of the Carl Jung theory on tarot cards and the great archetypes for anima and animus, which he's fantastically obsessed with, so it's great to read. He was one of Sigmund Freud's teachers, and also really into tarot cards. But if you read any of his work on tarot cards, he focuses completely on the major arcana and has a lot of ideas that he likes to talk about. He wasn't really an occultist. He was sort of a very early psychologist. But his theory that I agree with in a lot of ways is that understanding the universal archetypes of human existence allows you to more intuitively work with the cards and get back out from them what you really should. And I'll talk more deeply maybe about that in another video, but I think it's worth sort of understanding what all the archetypes mean and how you can get them deeply into your brain. And that's part of the reason that I want to share some cards with you today. But I wanted to first start by showing what a deck looks like, understanding how it works. You'll literally get a box like this if you buy some, if you buy them at your local shop or you get them online. They come like this, shrink wrapped in a box. Most of them have a really repetitive basic pattern on the back. The deck that this one is always has this blue plaid on the back. If it doesn't have that, it's probably a different version of the same symbols, but a different type. And so I also like to feel kind of what they're coated with, and you'll want to play with them and touch them a lot because it kind of helps some of the production coating come off of them. You don't want a ton of oil from your hands getting on them, but a little bit I think is okay. And sort of breaking them in a little bit to get them a little more comfortable in your hands. This is the same type of deck that I use when I read for myself and for others in front of people usually, but this is not the exact deck. The exact deck that I have for that I practice with is much more worn in. This box was lost long ago and I had to put it in something else. And I think that's good. I think the more comfortable you are with your cards, the more accurate your readings will be and the more comfortable you'll be with the things that they say to you. So that's sort of what the cards look like. And just to recap some of the things we've talked about before, tarot cards are a tool of divination, so of receiving a divine insight of some kind and being able to sort of get an idea of decisions that you could make, what your intuition is telling you, understanding problems from a different point of view. And I think that they're really worthwhile if you're thinking about changing things or you have a different point of view that you want to understand. If you're having trouble making decisions, if you don't know what to do, this is a good way to go. I do think that they have some ability to give you guidance on things that are coming in the future. For me, I focus on relationships and people, problems around profession or intellectual questions, and I think that's where they really shine for helping you understand what you're doing. They are 78 cards, typically. A typical deck of tarot cards, really no matter the style or the author or the artist, will be 78 cards. Traditionally 56 and 22. 22 is major, 56 is minor, and they represent lots of different things that have gone on historically in a person's typical life. So talking of that, I wanted to talk about one of the cards that kind of starts it off, and this is the Fool. The Fool is 0. So 0 is typically the first number, and that means that it ends at 21 with the World card. 0 is the beginning and the end. And so that's where the Fool is. And a lot of occultists and people that work on tarot cards consider the major arcana, at least, to be considered the Fool's journey. That doesn't mean that we go through every single stop in the major arcana throughout our lives. We might go down one path and then reverse back out and then visit it again. But sort of what the story is telling us is that we're going through the world, we're floating through the universe, and we're visiting all of these different times in our lives. And the Fool is both the beginning and the end. So you think of the major arcana as a circle or a cycle. And it's a cycle that's typically referred to as the Fool's journey. So what does this card tell us if we are to get this card in a reading? A couple of things. So first, let's walk through the card. That's what I feel is most important if you're learning to read, is you want to understand everything your card says, whether you're using this deck or one of the more modern decks or a different older one. Understanding the symbols will help you make smart decisions about what the cards are trying to communicate to you. So kind of think of them attempting to transmit. It's like a transmission that you want to be able to receive. So typically, and what I've said before, is that cards are typically thought of in thirds. So there's the bottom third, the middle third, and the top third. And there are some cards where that's really, really pronounced in a sort of heaven and earth, or base nature and above, heaven versus hell, all of those kinds of things. This one doesn't have so much of that. This is a very earth and above card. So we're really dealing with the bottom third and the top 2/3 when we read the symbolism for this card. So let me walk you through some of it. First, as you can see, it's very, very yellow. And the yellow is a indicator and a symbol of the sun, of brightness and of gold and of things that shine and of things that are open and in the light. So there's no sinister or negative connotations typically when you see yellow, especially in this deck. Also, the sun is white, which is pretty interesting because we typically think of the sun as yellow, and in many cards in this deck, the sun is yellow. But in the Fool, it's white because it represents an innocence and a naivete that is just radiating out from this card and our friend here. So we see this person who looks probably like a man, but not totally sure. Tarot cards are sort of originated in the traditional sense from France and Italy, just after the Renaissance and maybe a little bit medieval. They started as playing cards for games, and then there is a time when they were used for both. They were used for divination and to play games. And then tarot cards sort of switched over strictly to divination later, especially this deck. This is not intended as a deck to play games with at all. So we can look at our person, and there's a lot going on. So I think what's really helpful to start is just take a second and look at all of the elements of the card and try to think what you would interpret this card to mean if you were to get this card when you're maybe reading cards for your day. If you say, I'm going to take one card and it's going to give me guidance for the day, and this is the card you got, what are the items that you would pay attention to and that you would take a message from? Just sort of look at it for a second and get an idea of what you think, and then we'll go through them. So we talked about the sun, we talked about the yellow background, we talked about the number 0. The cards are in the major arcana are all numbered. And this is 0, so it's the beginning and the end of the journey. So a couple of things that we can see here. First, we have a bindle on a stick, and it has a reddish yellow bag here that's snapped closed. And this represents all of the tools that we have that we're carrying with us. So it's a reminder and a message to remember that you have everything inside you now that you need. I have everything within me now that I need to be successful or to go on my journey. It's already packed. I'm ready to go. I have it all inside, available to me. He also has a red feather in his cap, and that's giving us a little bit of passion or love or excitement. And that's kind of indicating that that's going right into the brain. Sometimes these cards can be very, very literal, and they can be read in a really literal way. I credit that, in my opinion, a lot to medieval art. Sometimes the symbolism was really hitting you over the head. A lot of things in this deck by Pamela Coleman Smith are very, very bright, shining symbols. And the red going right into his forehead is an indicator that he's got passion and fire and love and excitement and all of these things right into his brain. So next we kind of look, and we've talked about before in some other videos, I talked about wings. So we looked at the wings on the Lovers card, and we looked at the wings on the Devil card. And in this guy, he kind of has wings too. So he's sort of got this fluttery, floaty look going on, which is a symbol that he can fly, that he can take what he has and what he knows, and he can lift off if he makes the right choices. We also see that he's standing here at the edge of a cliff or a precipice. And so, like almost every tarot card that's out there, it can always be read in two ways. And the two ways to read it are this. Is he going to step off into a chasm and fall off and die? Or is he going to gingerly just jump across onto another rock? We don't know that because we don't see it. And that's kind of the divination part, is, are the choices you're going to make indicative of you just sort of gingerly stepping across a little jump, a little creek or something, or is it all the way down into the ground below, broken and dead? I don't know. So you have to think, am I jumping off? This is a jumping off point. Am I jumping off and flying with my wings, or am I jumping off and landing on my face? That's a big part of the Fool's journey too. So we've got that. We see that underneath, he's wearing a sort of white undergarment under his very colorful tunic, which again represents the innocence and the naivete of the Fool. The story is not written for the Fool. The Fool is ending a journey, but you're always beginning another one. And so he comes with this sense of underlying innocence in the white garment. The boots are yellow, which indicates riches and gold, and your feet are light and ready to take you wherever you need to go. They will carry you far. The boots are really pronounced, and you can really see them. Not a lot of the footwear in the cards is so well pronounced and so clear, and it's really indicating that you've strapped on the right shoes, you've got what you need, you're ready to get going. Let's start this journey. And so he's standing on his cliff, and then finally, and of course this white rose here is just such a clear indicator of innocence and purity and sort of a virginity, ready to start anew, fresh, right at the beginning. Hasn't been soiled or destroyed, and is very gingerly being held up in the air, which I love. Finally, if you've seen any of the videos I've done before, you know that I'm absolutely obsessed with animals in general, but particularly dogs, and I love it in the cards when there is an animal, especially a dog. So the dog for me is what I really anchor all of my symbolism for the Fool around, because I love dogs. So I use the dog as my guide for this card, and the dog is our guide. And that's really what this represents, is that you have this benevolent white creature beside you that's guiding you and sort of nipping at your heels to keep you going, to keep you paying attention, alert. The dog represents our instincts and our inner voice, that will keep us on the right path, keep us safe, keep us where we're supposed to go, as long as we listen to it, take care of it, pay attention to it, feed it, all those things that dogs need. So that's why I really anchor all of my reading of the Fool off of the dog, is I think, okay, I have this companion who is my spirit that's always with me, that's guiding me, helping me make good decisions, taking me down a path I might not have thought I should go, keeping me on the path when there's something maybe dangerous over a different way. So when we look at the dog, it indicates and informs the rest of the card, which is the Fool starting a journey, and you can't go on that journey without your instincts represented by this little white dog that I love. So that's the Fool card, and when you look at the major arcana, you should really think that each of the journeys within those archetypes is relevant to the Fool's journey. So you can step into that secular journey at any point, and that's sort of why the Fool is the beginning and the end. You might start at a different card, you might start at a different place, but ultimately the Fool is sort of the representative of a new cycle beginning or a cycle ending. So I want to talk about two other cards that are really relevant to the Fool. The first one being Death, and then the second one will be the Magician. And it's hard because they really both, either one of these could be next, but we'll start with Death. So the Death card, I was talking to someone on Twitter about this today, and if you're really novice to looking at tarot cards, you might see Death and get really concerned. But in many ways, Death is an echo of the Fool. So there are a lot of cards in most tarot decks that have similarities or are mirror images of each other or dual sides of each other. In this case, Death is a very similar card to the Fool. Let's talk about why. First, Death, when you pull it, is telling you that something has ended. Whether it's something good or something bad, something is over. And you need to embrace that and move forward in a new light, with a new way. Things are done. And there's also a joyousness to the Death card. Typically the Death card, or the kind of Christian imagery that's imbued into the Death card, is that Judgment Day is next. And Judgment Day is a very joyous occasion because it means that you're going home, that you're going to be with the spirit, all of those different things. So let's walk through this card and talk about some of the symbols on it and how they relate to the Fool. First, number 13. Wow. 13 has been a unlucky or death-related number for a really long time. Obviously, it's a 4 in numerology. So let's walk through our number 13, Death. First, what does he have here? He has a big old flag, and it has a flower on it, and that flower is the Rosicrucian rose, which is typically related to the Rosicrucian occult societies or the Golden Dawn. You'll also see that on its point, it's pointed down like a pentagram. We also see a pentagram in the Devil card. Typically our pentacles, which represent money and are a suit in the tarot, are pointed up, and in this case we have a point down. So what does this card represent with the Rosicrucian flower on the flag? It's representative, again, of the great mysteries, and it's representative of a harvest. It's representative of something has ended. You've planted the seed, you've tended that garden, it has grown, it's produced flowers, and now it's time to harvest them. Which is why it references a reaping. It references the Grim Reaper. So kind of the idea of this is the end, the fields will now be barren and then turned over to something else. So we also see Death, who is in armor, which is indicative of his really inability to be beaten. However, you'll notice that Death is not armed. He doesn't have a sword, he doesn't have a spear, bow and arrow. He's completely unarmed, but he's protected. And the indicator there is that Death will always win. Now look at the differences between the clothes in our two friends here. The Fool is wearing these soft, beautiful, flowery, flowy, winged clothes with this white garment underneath indicating purity, and our no protection at all. And our Death is a warrior on a horse. He doesn't have a weapon, and neither does the Fool, but they both have this red going right into their head. But you can see in Death, it's kind of down and backwards, whereas we're up and kind of trailing behind, and and receiving almost like an antenna, death sits down behind him. So while that blood and passion and life is there, it's on the downswing. He's on a white horse, which represents, of course, typically purity. A lot of this has to do with death does not choose, death does not judge. And then let's look at what's going on in front of our horse, behind our horse, and down here. It's looking rough. So we have tiny, tiny, hard to see, a little tiny boat. And I don't know if you know this, but there are these myths that when you die, you have to cross a river. And so we have our boat crossing a river here. There's nothing indicating that you're paying anyone or that there's any way to get back or trick the boat driver for the river. But with death, you do need to take that journey across the river, right? And so let's look in front of death. We have a religious looking figure. He looks like the Pope. He's got a religious hat on. He has a mitre. He has a cape. He's got a little cross on his gloves. And he's greeting and welcoming death because he knows that death is something joyous, and death means the end of one cycle, but the beginning of another. And how does he know that? So again, the symbolism is really hitting you over the head here. If you look above our hat on our friend, we see in the background the sun is rising, and it's rising between two towers. And what do you normally have between two towers? A gate. And so this is representative of the gate of heaven. The sun is rising again, the gates to the next life. And his little hat's pointing right at that because he knows he's getting through. He feels really confident. So then we look down here at these other characters. So first, let's start with this guy. He's got one of those fur stoles around his shoulders. He's got a blue garment on, and he has red shoes. A lot of times red shoes represent either a religious figure or royalty. In this case, it represents royalty because if you look really closely, you can see here, there's a crown on the ground. So this guy's laid out on his back, his crown fell off. And this is one of those indicators that we see so much in medieval art, which is all about those who can and can't pass into some kind of heaven. This king, despite being very powerful and having lots of wealth and power and all of these different things, he has fallen in front of death. He has not been able to recognize the spiritual renewal and rebirth that death brings, whereas a spiritual leader has. So that's a pretty heavy-handed symbolism, I feel, is that, the aristocracy is laid out, but our clergy are ready to go. So let's look at these two figures here. So this is one where the smaller child is again looking right at death. So I think we've talked about this before. Looking where the gaze is pointed on the figures of the cards is huge. It will help you a ton because it can give you an idea of what they consider important. So if you look at their gaze of the Pope guy looking at death and the little girl looking at death, it kind of gives you an idea that they have an innocence and a welcoming of a new cycle in their lives, a new transition. Whereas the older figure, which maybe is adolescent or adult, is looking away. And so this is really just an indicator that while she's wearing a white robe, she just is not ready for what that next incarnation may be. She's maybe, there's a part of this that is saying you're hiding who you really are, or you're presenting a front that indicates something different than your true spiritual self. So when we get this card, we have a lot going on, but ultimately what this card means is whether you're ready to accept it or not, something has ended or will end. And you need to understand what your path forward is. And death is really telling you to embrace that ending and embrace that change. Be like this clergy guy. Do not be like our king friend on the ground who's just like flipped out, fell down, crown off, can't take it. Embrace the change and you'll have a more fruitful experience where you can go beyond the gates into the heavenly realm, which is indicating there's something better literally on the horizon for you. So that's a little bit of compare and contrast. And what I also think is interesting is that the colors and where they're laid is really similar. So we have the yellow and red here, and then we have the yellow ground and the yellow figure here. We have the white girl dressed in white looking here, and then we have the white dog in the bottom right corner here as well. So I think that's pretty interesting when you look at the decoration on the heads of the figures, and then you talk about the Fool being the 0, so the beginning and the end, and then Death being the end and then the beginning. So these cards are really similar, and when you get them, kind of think of them in a way that is nuanced and lets you bring the different symbolism and nuances from each card into the choices that you'll make or the guidance that you take from them. But they do have sort of a play off of each other that you can think about. I would much rather get the Fool because the Death card is a bit abrupt. It's going to hurt a little, and it's going to be an ending that, despite the fact that there are absolutely reassurances and wonderful things on the other side of it, that process is always painful, especially if you're struggling against it. And that's a lot of what this card is telling us, is that our friend here, he's standing up, he's welcoming the change, he's welcoming the next level of his evolution, he's pointing up into this more spiritual, higher plane, and our aristocrat has lost his crown and is a little bit useless. So the message here is to embrace this change, but an end is coming or has come already that you might not be embracing, depending on how you're contextually reading the cards. So the Fool and Death have a lot of similarities, and now I want to talk about the Magician. This is a card that's fantastic that I really, really love working with, and I love when somebody gets it for something that they're trying to do or trying to manifest in their lives. The Magician's great. So 0, 13, and 1. So I'll let you just take a second and look at this card and see how you feel about it. There's a lot going on here, but our friend is right in the middle. Very important part of the card. So what kinds of things are you noticing? Let me walk you through what I notice when I look at this card. First, it's a 1. It's very singular, it's very individual, it's representative of one person by themselves, neither hindered nor helped by anyone or anything else. It is very, very singular. And we have a singular figure. Let's start from the top. So we have these roses crowning him. So roses are typically thought to be lucky, and they have lots of different meanings, but these are red. So they've got this aspect of passion to them, an aspect of life, an aspect of blood and movement. They're crowning him. And that's something that you'll find in cards frequently, is that an archway or a trellis or curtains or something like that will always be crowning. And that's an indicator and a symbol. In this case, this is sort of a charmed indicator. Our figure is blessed or charmed or has something really positive on his side that he can't control, that is not of this world. He's holding his hand up. And so if you looked at the Devil card with me in a different video, you saw that the Devil was doing the same thing. He was pointing up and he was pointing down. And that's a pretty traditional occultist stance to take, to point to below and above, and to be the thing in the middle that unites those. So unites heaven and earth, unites our earthly physical world with the spiritual heavenly world above him. He's holding a wand, and it has candles on both ends. What are we always supposed to never do? You never burn a candle at both ends. He can. He's a magician. He's magical. Like, he can do that. It's fine. And it also is a representation of making one thing into two and bringing two things back into one. So it's that ability to have and unite, have and unite. So he's able to split things into halves, and he's able to bring those things back in together. And that's just sort of one of the indicators of power that this card is displaying, is that I'm uniting heaven and earth through my personal physical being. I'm burning the candle at both ends because I don't get, it's fine. I can unite two things into one, and I can have two things in one as well as break them apart into two. So it's almost a water wine back and forth. I can do whatever I want sort of scene. He also, like our friend the Fool, is wearing white undergarments, and then he's draped in red. The colors, especially in the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, while they are not super vibrant, and a lot of times, for example, this green and yellow and blue here is hard to distinguish, the colors really do have a lot of symbolism and meaning with them. So if you do anything with color theory, and there's tons of charts that explain the different symbols of and feelings of each different color, you can find those pretty much everywhere. Most tarot books even have it in them. Red is typically representative of blood, power, passion, capability, sometimes, and typically love, but in this case, it really is more of a power red. You've heard of like a power tie or, a power suit. This is like a power cape. It's a power cloak. He's got the power. And in fact, if you're a child of the 80s, you can kind of remember, I have the power of Grayskull, and then he lifts the sword to the sky. So the belt. This belt is actually a little bit hard to see, but it's a snake and it's biting itself. And if you're familiar with symbology at all, a snake biting itself, an Ouroboros, is representative similarly to the infinity symbol or the limnoscate, which is above his head, which goes on and on forever. So we see the power that this individual has, and he's crowned by the limnoscate or infinity, which is typically a symbol of heaven or a symbol of everlasting life. And it's also kind of, I like to think of it a little bit as a roller coaster. And in fact, when we look at another infinity symbol here on the Two of Pentacles, this Two of Pentacles symbol really comes with a lot of warning. So when you see those limnoscates or you see infinity symbols, they come with a warning that, have you gotten on a ride that you can't get off? Are you perpetuating something that you need to stop? Have you put something in motion that could potentially go on forever if you don't get in and intervene and cause something to be fixed or right that you've put into place? So the limnoscate always brings a warning, and I would be really careful. In this particular card, I feel that it does have a lot of symbology around everlasting life and the ability to keep going and keep going and keep going. But depending on the context of the card, you might want to take that as a warning. So we're down about here. We see this table, and the table has some kind of hard to see occult magical symbols carved into the side. But what's on the table? So this is where, for me, I anchor my symbolism for this card is the items on the table. We talked in the last video about the 4 suits within the minor arcana in tarot cards. And they're almost always the same in every tarot deck. Do you remember them? I will point them out to you. Cups, Pentacles, Swords, Wands. Did you remember all of them? Probably. They're pretty easy to see. So on the table, we have all of the different symbols, and they represent water, the elements. So water, earth, air, and fire. And they're on the table in front of the magician. And now this is why I want to talk about the magician and the fool together. The fool is 0. He represents our journey. The magician is 1. So that kind of represents the next step in that journey. Going from the fool to all powerful is pretty impressive. But the reason that he was able to do that is because he opened up his little bag, and much like Hermione's bag of infinity that she has with all those things in it, what's in this bag? All of these things. Everything our magician needs is within him, and he has now taken it out of the bag and put it on the table. Ready to go. I've got it all. This is all I need. The reason this is all he needs is because these are representative of the 4 suits that represent all of those different experiences that can happen from the major arcana. But the point is, he has control and power over the 4 elements, right? So that's what an alchemist or an occultist or a magician or anyone would want to have. Complete and total power and control over earth, air, water, and fire. That's great. Wow, super cool. Love it. And then below we have additional flowers. So we have lilies and roses together that represent both an innocence and a passion to go forward, to do more. So you're coming from a pure place with your white tunic underneath your red draped cloak, and you have these foundational items, which are passion, innocence, goodwill, good intention, that you will then use to leverage your tools and get everything you want in heaven, on earth, with his pointing. So the Magician is a great card if you're trying to start a business, if you're embarking on something that seems really hard, if you have a lot of things going on that you've got to take care of, things that are confusing, things that are hard, and you ask, hey, what's going to happen? You pull the Magician, and the message is this: don't be distracted. You have everything you need. Focus on what you need to do. Use the tools that you have. Use them in a smart way. Use them effectively, and go for it. There's a lot of cards that indicate things like you can do it, but you need another person, or you can do it, but your community has to be behind you, or you'll get there, but it's going to take time. That is not the message of the Magician. The message of the Magician is, this is done. This is in the bag. In fact, it's no longer in the bag. You took it out and put it on the table. You put it straight on the table. There's no reason not to use these tools that are available to you. So let's get going. You can't mess this up. This is not a failure situation. This is a situation where all I need you to do is focus on what you have, using the things that you have in front of you, and not getting stuck. Talking about this kind of infinity piece, and not making mistakes, and not losing the belief in yourself that you have. So that's the Magician, the Fool, a little bit of the Two of Pentacles, and Death. So I think we'll stop there for today, and I'll come back probably tomorrow with something else. I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about the Three of Pentacles for sure, and probably the Four of Wands and the Three of Cups. So we'll talk a little bit more about the minor arcana next time, so that we have a good idea around what a lot of those have to tell us and what we can do with them. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining.